Okay, guys, I think we are ready to get started. Thank you for the patience. It takes even the digital SAT folks a few weeks to grade your score. The practice tests obviously are graded right away. But the ACT takes 4 to 5 weeks usually to send your score back. We just did it in 45 minutes. So thank you. It always gets a little frantic between the test and the seminar, but we don't want to make you guys wait around too long. Thank you guys all for joining us. I am Paul Jury, founder of PJ Test Prep. My last name is just like in the court. Feel free to make fun of it if you like. Some suggestions include injury, grand jury, forgery, perjury. The jury is out. The jury is in. Whatever. If I went to England and got knighted, I'd be surgery. I appreciate you guys being here, and the point of this presentation is to inform you guys as much about the SAT and ACT as possible. Everything from should I even take these tests? When should I do that if I'm going to? Which one should I take? And most importantly, the fun part, can I score higher on them and how to do that? So that reminds me, I did. Maybe not. Maybe I forgot that part. Oh well, we'll deal without it. We'll do this right-handed then. I'm normally left-handed. I actually want to start this presentation with kind of a teaser. I'll do kind of a proper introduction to everything here, but I like to start these off with an actual ACT test question. The reason I do that, besides to give you guys some tips on how to handle the ACT science section, and get your attention and all that. It's also because doing a problem really exemplifies the theme of what I hope to get across today. If you guys get nothing else from this seminar, I hope that you get that these tests are very learnable. And the idea is that the more you understand about how these tests work, the easier and less intimidating the whole process becomes. What we're looking at here on the first page, it might not be on you guys' printout, but on the screen here is an example of a pretty typical ACT science question. And just like the ACT itself, or the SAT for that matter, sometimes these questions can be a little daunting. You see this and you're like, what the heck is going on here? I've never heard of this before. I thought I took good science in high school, but now I'm looking at these things called facies. What even are these? Oh man, I'm going to do terrible on this section. First thing you need to know about the science section of the ACT is it does not require the knowledge of any actual science. It's not a science test. It's a science reasoning test. It would be unfair for them to test random science concepts that some kids would have learned and other kids wouldn't. Maybe you went to a theater high school where they don't require chemistry at all, and some other kid just memorized the periodic table yesterday. So if they ask questions like, how many electrons are in a boron atom? Like, that's not fair because one kid knows that, and the rest of us are like, you're a boron. So they don't ask questions like that. They just give you stuff that nobody knows about. Unless your parent is a plate tectonic geologist, you've probably never heard of this before. That's okay. All of the answers are just in the graph. They're just testing to see if you can look at a graph and understand how graphs work. So when you look at this graph, don't get all intimidated by all this. You've never seen this before. You're not supposed to have. Just look at the stuff you do know, like how the temperature seems like it starts off cold on this side and gets really hot over here. Then look at the axes. We have depth getting bigger the more you go down. You know how like depth works. And over here, ooh, this is a really tricky graph. It's a double y-axis. We've got pressure also increasing the more you go down. Now, you might actually know that science. You might be like, oh, that's right. One time I went scuba diving, and the deeper down I got, the more pressurized it was. That's true. You don't even have to know that, though. It just says it right in the graph. So if you've never been scuba diving, that's okay. You can just it from the graph. So when they start asking you questions about like facies G, you've never heard of facies G before. You're not supposed to have. You're just supposed to go find it. There's facies G. All right, well, what about it? They want to know it'll most likely form under which of the following pressure and temperature conditions. Well, temperature doesn't really matter for facies G because it's kind of like everything. But if you start looking at facies G's pressure's over here, guys. Does facies G want to have like not very much pressure, or does it want like a lot of pressure? Like a lot, right? Like more than 10 if you were to draw a line across on here. So like more than 10. Oh, the answer is J. It's the only one where pressure is bigger than 10. Oh, what's KB? What's a facies? Who cares? Why would you want to know any of this? Like, why do you care about science here if it's standing in the way of you getting a good science score? Now, I don't mean to sound like anti-academic, like being bad at math is good on the ACT. No, like if you're good at reading and good at math, it's going to be easier. Like if you're experienced in science, maybe you'll be less intimidated by charts, but you don't have to have taken anything higher than like mid-level algebra 2, like ninth grade English. Like that's where this stuff tops out, because otherwise it isn't fair. Otherwise you start discriminating against people who don't have access to high level AP classes, and they need to some farm kid or some kid in a rough high school somewhere to be able to do well on this if they actually have the courage and horsepower to stay in there and like answer these questions. The answers are right there in the test. You just have to learn how to like shake them out. So this is how all the science sections work on the ACT. Those of you who took the science section this morning may have found it quite intimidating, but all the answers were there. I bet if you go through with no time pressure, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I could have gotten more of these right. And that's how we improve our scores. By learning about how the test works, the whole thing just becomes. That also applies to just how the test process, and in fact, the grander college admissions process works as well. The more you know about it, the easier and less intimidating it becomes. So I want to take just a minute here. You might know some of this stuff already, but I do want to spend a few minutes covering kind of the overall current game plan. What is going on right now with standardized tests? Do they matter anymore? Not at the UCs. They definitely matter at Harvard, though. So, like, what are we supposed to be doing with these tests? When should I take the test? That kind of stuff. And then we'll return to more test questions later in the section to help you guys improve your scores further. So first, a big elephant in the room right now is just the question everybody's asking. Ever since the pandemic, this has just been wacky. It's been a wild, weird world out there with college admissions. Are schools requiring scores right now? The short answer is this graph. Most schools are still not requiring scores, but most schools, 97% of them, will look at your score and it will help you if your score is good, especially in a world of wildly inflated GPAs. Everybody has a 4.4 now. That doesn't mean anything if you're looking at selective colleges. You need something else besides that, and the SAT or ACT could be that thing. It doesn't have to be that thing. If you test badly and your GPA is great, then don't send your score in. We'll get to that. The big news is that a lot of colleges, especially the really selective ones, have started to go back to requiring the SAT. Now, this is still not very many of them. This graph's a little old. It was only 3% when I made this graph like 2 years ago. It's probably up to like 6 or 7% now. Half the Ivies are requiring the tests again. Purdue, Tennessee, UT Austin, basically every school in Florida where there never was a pandemic. These schools are all requiring the tests again. So if you want to apply to Georgetown, you have to take the SAT. If you want to apply to Dartmouth, you have to take the SAT or the ACT, either one. Now, there are some schools, some very important ones here in California that are on the other end of the spectrum. The UCs and the Cal States are test blind. They won't even look at your test scores if you send them in. If you lived in any of the other 49 states, this wouldn't really matter. But we live in California where it does matter a lot. Almost every one of my students is applying to at least one UC and or Cal State. Sometimes only those schools, although these days with, even UC Davis requiring a 4.2 or whatever to get in, I like to recommend some other options like, maybe Arizona or Washington or anywhere besides the UCs, because they're crazy hard to get into right now. Because they're not requiring tests. And so everybody in California applies to them, even if they have no testing ability and no extracurriculars at all. They're like, I have a 3.9, I'm going to apply to everywhere. And maybe, who knows, maybe I'll get into UCLA. You won't. 3.9. At UCs, Cal States do not want to see your test scores, so don't bother sending them. There are occasionally some side uses for them. Sometimes there's scholarships that you can use. Sometimes you can get placed into higher level classes and test out of stuff. But generally, you don't need them if you're applying to Cal States or UCs. The other 1,300 colleges, though, are still in this test optional category. The reason colleges have stayed in this test optional category rather than picking a lane, are we going to go back to the SAT like the Ivy Leagues and MIT are doing, or are we going to just abandon them like UCLA is doing? A lot of schools love being test optional for selfish reasons. It allows them to pretend that they have extremely high SAT average acceptances because the only people who are sending them in are 1,300 plus. Even though, 80% of their applicants aren't scoring that high, well, those people aren't sending them in. So, if some random school in Michigan can be like, We have a 1450 SAT score, but our GPA acceptance is 2.9. Oh, I see what's going on then. You're just kind of padding your stats. So that's part of it. A lot of schools also wanted to see what would happen with the digital SAT, whether it was going to be a flop or a success. It seems to be still a little controversial, but more of a success than a flop. And so schools are starting to be like, all right, fine, we'll go back to it because God, we need some way to separate all these kids with the exact same GPA. But a lot of schools are still test optional. What that means is you should take the test and then send in your score if it helps you. If it doesn't help you, don't send it in. It's as simple as that. In a way, there's never been a better time to do the SAT or ACT because it is optional. It's like extra credit. You can always not use it if it doesn't help. And if it does help, you have something to help you stand out among the sea of other applicants. So most schools are test optional. A few schools outside of California, there's like a couple of schools that are testing. It's a very much only California thing. We're very like, hey, we're doing our own thing here in California. We're the best state, so we're going to make our own rules. Most of the other schools, though, are at least looking at it, and a bunch of schools, especially in the East Coast, are shutting it down. Short answer. So you may not need the SAT. Your GPA is super high. Get this. If your GPA is super high and your scores are low, one thing I would look at based on these test scores today is like, where are you relative to your GPA? If you have a 4.6 GPA and you got a 19 on the ACT today, probably not going to send that in. It's probably not something that's going to help you. If you have a 3.6 though, and you got a 27 on the ACT, you should definitely send that in. That's very much going to help. I'm happy to make specific recommendations on what you should do. Short answer is, if you got a 27 or higher or a 1350 or higher, I would pretty much always send that in, even to Harvard. I know their average acceptance is a little higher than that, but like 1350 is hard to get on the SAT. If you got anywhere near there, you're great at this. And so show them another thing that separates you from the rest of your peers, because a 3.9 doesn't separate you from the rest of your peers anymore. So I always err on the side of, leaning into the test a little bit more. If you got a score that's below average, average being about a 21 on the ACT and about 1,000 or so on the SAT, or excuse me, yeah, I said that right. Especially if you have a good GPA, those are unlikely to help you. If it's somewhere between that, like you got an 1150, it kind of depends on what your GPA is. If your GPA is great, an 1150 is not that great, but you, with a little prep, you could get that up to a 1300, 1350, and then, maybe it would be helpful. If, you're like, I hate this test so much, I got a 960 and I'll never score higher because I promise I won't put any effort in, and you have a decent GPA, then maybe you wouldn't use it. It's just a case by case basis, but it really can be the thing to help set you apart. You also don't know what your score might be. This test, some people will be like, my PSAT was higher than this. Yeah, because you were using the easy PSAT curve. This is the real SAT curve, and so now you have to adjust accordingly. You may have had a bad test day today. You're like, I was so tired, I barely even answered half the questions. Some people omitted a lot of questions, whether you actually did or the scanner just thought you did. That never helps because you should have just guessed randomly. You'll pick up a whole bunch of points just doing it. So, keep in mind what your score is today isn't necessarily where your score will be. It can be very competitive for GPA. Only apps, again, we're having really high level acceptance rates, really high difficulty levels of getting into these places if you only submit ACT or only submit GPAs. This stat is, you got to take this with a grain of salt because there is some evidence. Well, pretty much every school says or shows data that if you submit a higher test score, you will most likely have a higher chance of acceptance and more scholarship money. But you have to take that with a grain of salt because it's like the people submitting the high scores that are getting that. So, if you're submitting your 910 SAT score, that doesn't apply to you. But bottom line is, this is a thing, especially in a world where not everybody is taking the tests, that can help set you apart in a world where everybody kind of looks the same. We had a weird thing that happened during the pandemic where there were like no tests for a couple of years and grades were like the only thing that mattered at so many schools, which was good news for those with high GPAs. But if you got a B once, can't get into UCLA now because you got a B once. Sorry. Oh no. Well, can I at least apply to Santa Cruz? Oh, you got that B though. Did you get 2 Bs? Oh yeah, I can't get into Santa Cruz either. It just weren't kept really competitive. So you have to think about, all the schools you're applying to and how you can best represent yourself. This is obviously not the only thing schools care about. I think at most your SAT score is going to weigh in about like 20-25% of what they're looking at in terms of your fitness for acceptance. GPA is always going to be a bigger deal, but like Northwestern never should have let me in based on the high school GPA I had. I had a good GPA, but I got to be once or twice. Just too many valedictorians vying for those spots. So taking a test, writing weird college application essays, helped do something that maybe everybody else wasn't. Kicked out some poor valedictorian from that spot that I got instead. So that's whether we would take the tests. Which test would you take if you're thinking of doing one of them? We are still in paper ACT land. They are trying to develop a digital ACT, but it's hard to say when that'll happen. The ACT strategy through the whole pandemic and changing academic standards has been, let's change nothing. Let's do everything the same as we've been doing for the last 40 years. The SAT's approach has been, let's change everything and let's do it every 6 or 7 years. So this is the third time they've revised their test since I've been doing this, and it's a little annoying. Pick something and stick with it. But they have this new digital format now, and the tests are more different now than ever before. There's a lot of similarities to them. I'd still say they're about 60% the same. If you prep for one, that's going to help you with the other one. And certain things like the content on the tests isn't that much different. They both go up through like mid-level algebra 2, but the styles and the mediums of the tests are now quite different. So sometimes that can dictate which one you might take. The short answer is that many students do try both tests. If you're going to try to hack the admission system, you might as well hack it all the way and try them both and use which one you do better on, because we have the Olympics coming up in Paris and then in LA in 4 years. My anecdote has always been like, if you're in the Olympics in the long jump contests and the judges are like, hey, you can run down this track and jump and we'll just use that distance. Or if you want, you can run down this track and jump, and then this other track, it's a little different material, a little different jumping board, but kind of the same thing. You jump there and we'll use whichever distance is better. What would you like to do? Would you like to jump once or would you like to jump twice? Why would you not jump twice? Like, they're not averaging your distances, they're taking the better one. Why would you not do them both? Like, try them at least on a practice test, at least. Decide which one's better for you. Look at what the scores are. Oh, I'm naturally much better at the ACT. Oh, I did better on the SAT. I did about the same, but I liked one better. I don't know. Kind of hated them both, but did okay on both. My GPA's got a couple B's in it. Why don't I take them both? What's the worst that happens? You wasted a Saturday morning. You're probably just going to play Call of Duty all morning anyway. Paper ACT. What is the difference? And by the way, the one acceptance of when someone's like, I really want to focus only on one test. That's fair. And if you do score better on one test, then yeah, then there isn't a real strong reason to take it. Some factors that determine that are the formats. The ACT now has way more questions on it than the SAT does. It's got 215 questions. And yes, you get almost 3 hours, but it's not like the SAT's that much shorter. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes for less than half as many questions. What the, how can they justify that? Is the SAT way easier? No, the questions are harder on the SAT. Some of the ACT questions are like such softballs. You're like, I can't even believe how easy this question is. I mean, some of the ones on the SAT, especially the beginning of the math sections, are that way too, but they get way gnarly by the end. If any of you took an SAT, some of the ones at the end are terrible. If you've heard all the TikTok, Instagram buzz around the like recent tests, kids are just like, it was so hard. But if you actually ask them, you're like, well, what was hard? Every question? No, just some of them. Which ones? The ones at the end of every section? No, the ones at the end of the hard math section. Oh, okay, yeah, the hard ones are hard, right? Like if you run around fighting every person you meet, someday you're going to run into an MMA fighter. Oh, this fighting is so hard. When you fight that guy, yeah, but when you punching a toddler. Sorry, this is getting out of hand here. I have 2 little kids myself. I can definitely still take them. Especially that 4.5-year-old. She just flies around the room. Anyway, stop it. It's already dead. You have 98 questions in 2 hours and 14 minutes, but they are trickier. And so you want to think about that. This is a really exaggerated analogy, but you know how in like second grade, you do like a whole page of like multiplication problems and they're kind of tedious. You know how to do them. You just have to do a lot. That's the ACT. The SAT is like, would you rather do that or would you rather do a single pre-calculus problem? Takes about the same amount of time, but it's one problem and it's way more difficult and challenging. That's the SAT. So some people prefer to just do the one problem because they've done this stuff more recently. The ACT gives you an option of doing a lot of stuff very quickly. Timing is key on the ACT. That's what makes it hard. Another thing that influences people one way or the other, besides some people like working on a tablet or a laptop, some people like paper. The fact that the ACT only has a quarter of your score based on math, whereas the SAT is half math. If you are great at math, much better than at the verbal, you should definitely consider the SAT because it weights the math way heavier. If, on the other hand, you hate math, that's the area that you stink at, and you're pretty good at the verbal stuff, you should do the ACT. Yes, the ACT does have a quarter of your score based on science, but as we saw a minute ago, that's certainly not math. It's not even science. It's just a graph reading contest. So people who are naturally inclined or disinclined to math compared to the verbal will find one test often better suited. The normal paper test versus adaptive, I don't think that really affects how anybody's score works. So I don't think that's really a factor in determining which test you should take. But I do want to talk quickly about what the adaptive thing means because people get really confused about that. ACT is just normal. You take a test and the number of questions you get right, no matter whether they're easy, medium, or hard or wherever, they're all worth the same. They all factor into your score, which is bell curved. So like if you're in the middle of the curve, test questions weight a little bit less, but it's not like it's an individual question that weights less or not. It's just that it stretches out on the edges. It's very hard to get like a perfect ACT score because you have to get 215 questions right. I had a girl in my spring class get a 36. She missed one question on the whole test, rounded up to a 36. You can't even miss a single one on the SAT, or you can't get a 1600. But then again, there's not really a difference to colleges between a 1520 and a 1500. How the adaptive on the SAT works, it's not question adaptive like the GMAT and the GRE are for any parents familiar with graduate tests. It's section adaptive. Basically, you have 4 sections, 2 verbals, then 2 maths. And on the verbal, you'll take your first section and it will be just like everybody else's in the room. Sometimes they'll give you a slightly different order of questions. So if you're trying to cheat off your neighbor's computer, you might see something different for theirs. But you're taking the same test as them in section 1. Based on how well you do, however, you will get a harder or an easier section 2. So section 2, if you do poorly on section 1, you will get an easier stage 2. That's good because you get easier questions, but it's bad because your score is already going to be lower than if you had unlocked the harder section. The highest you can get is about a 600 now. If you don't unlock the harder section in section 2, you are stuck maxing at 600, which still a good score, not as good as a 650 or 700. That's inaccessible to you at this point because you missed 2 questions on the first section. You do, though, get easier questions. So sometimes people are like, what are you talking about? That second section was really easy. Well, that's because you got the easier one. So at least there's that as a consolation. You can see here there's only 2 hard ones versus many more green easy ones here than there were. There's also, by the way, what do the gray ones mean? Gray ones are unscored experimental questions that they pop in there randomly and they don't count. And you have no idea which ones those are. So unfortunately, you can't just be like, aha, 16 is a no count question. I'm not going to do it. No, you don't know. I would say, though, that if you're ever having a particularly tough time on a question, you should bail immediately because maybe that one doesn't even count. Why spend 4 minutes bashing your head against the table on a question that might not even count? Do that anyway. Even if a question does count, no question is worth 4 minutes. But think about that. If you do better on the first section, you will unlock the harder stage 2, which doesn't have as many easies. It has a lot of mediums. I will say, having taken 8 of these practice tests in the past 6 months, even the harder section math starts off with some pretty easy ones. So don't think, oh my gosh, I got easy ones at the beginning. I must be in the easier section. No. Wait till you get to the end. You'll find out if you're in the harder section or not. The medium ones aren't bad, but somewhere around question like 11, 12, 13, suddenly the math questions start getting real nasty. And by the last 5 or 6 of them, they're quite evil, usually at the end of the harder math section. But the good news is you're already locked into a higher score band. And because those easy and medium ones also are good for a lot of points, if you even do a good job getting up to the end of the hard math one, you already have a good math score. if you stink, if you totally melt down on the last 4 or 5 questions, you won't get a 760 on the math, but you still might get a 700. So don't freak out too much if they're hard. Just know that if you're going for a top shelf MIT level score, you're going to have to be prepared to battle some pretty bad boys at the end of that. Same is true of the verbal. The verbal sections are a little more mixed around, though. They go easy to hard only within each question type. So the first vocab question is easy, the last one's hard, then it resets again. So you do get hard questions, but they're not all in one place. So if that answers any questions about how your tests seem to get harder or easier this morning if you took an SAT, that affects it. At the end of the day, though, there's no magic trick for the adaptive thing other than don't spend too much time on one question, but that's true of the paper test as well. Some questions do count a little bit more than others on the SAT, but you don't know which ones they are, and it's not a huge amount. It might be that one question's worth 17 points and another one's worth 11 points or 10 points, but they're all worth something. Every question you get right's moving your score up. If a hard question's hard, don't do it. If an easy question's easy, definitely do it. There's no like weird magic way of doing it. You're just trying to get as many questions right as you can, just like on the paper. So don't think about that too much. Just wanted to explain. Okay, last logistical thing before we raise you guys' scores here. When should I test? This is kind of my general like layout, and I'll let you read this over later, but I'll focus mostly on the junior year, which is the year you want to take these SATs and ACTs. I'm sort of 3 suggested times that you could take the test. The most popular time, the one I usually recommend to the most students, is spring of junior year. Spring of junior year is a great time to take the tests for a variety of reasons. Your brain is very buff from taking hard AP classes all junior year, and your cognitive capacity is ripped and shredded and ready to take a test. You have the benefit of that whole half of a year, and then you can still be done by the end of junior year, which is really nice. So if you take the test and, let's say you take the ACT in February and the SAT in March, or one of those, and then you retake in April or maybe June or maybe May, depending on how many APs you have, those are great because then you can be done and you can spend your senior summer doing more interesting things like writing your college application, going to parties. Just the opposite. You can also take the test earlier if you want. I mean, you can take it later. I don't really recommend waiting until like August or September or October of your senior year because things are getting really stressful and pressed then. I mean, you can do it then. It's not illegal. But I'd rather you get it done sooner. If you want to do it in the winter because you got a lot of spring sports, that's fine too. You can take the test in December or October or whatever. You can even prep over the summer and do it in the fall if you want. Sometimes summer is the best time for people who have a ton of APs or whatever. Earliest I would say you would take these tests would be fall of junior year, like August, September. That'd be the earliest. Before that is just why? You're just going to do better when you're a junior. Why take the test as a freshman? So do it junior year sometime. Spring is most common, but winter or fall is fine if you want to do it that way too. Consider when you're going to take the test and which ones. I personally took the test, not that this is the right way to do it, but I took the March SAT, the April ACT, and then I retook them both in June. And that seemed to work well. It dodged all the AP tests mostly. And then, junior not too burned out yet. You can say, hey, if I do this, I can be done forever. And I got 2 attempts in on both tests. But it's up to you guys, whatever fits your schedule. Okay. Does anybody have any logistical questions? Like when should we do these? Which one should I do? What's the difference? Hopefully I was pretty thorough on that. So think about that. Something to go plan going forward. Do I take these tests? And if so, when? That's the first question you want to ask yourself. Second is how can I score higher? So here is where we get to the fun page. This is page 3 of your packet. Couple of obvious things, hopefully, to start. Number 1, please, for the love of God, guess on every single question. There is no guessing penalty on the SAT or ACT anymore. There used to be a penalty. If your parents remember, they used to take off a quarter of a point for getting something wrong. They stopped doing that like 10 years ago and never looked back. So there's no reason not to bubble B on every question that you miss. Well, wait, why B? Is B like statistically more likely to be right? No, but if you want to tell yourself that, sure. Guess around. There is some strategy involving like if you find certain types of questions you're better at, like you stink at geometry, but you're good at algebra, maybe you would skip a geometry question and then come back to it, but you want to at least bubble something for it. Same with the verbal, especially on the SAT. where there's very different types of questions. There's these reading passage ones, which can be kind of dense and time consuming. And then there's these vocab ones, which are easy if you're good at vocab, but are hard if you don't know any of the vocab words. Then there's the grammar, which some people are great at and they go really fast and other people really struggle with. Identify the types of questions that you are good at and do those first to make sure you can get them right. You don't want to run out of time. You don't want to run out of time on something you're good at. Run out of time on the thing you hate. You're probably going to get wrong anyway. It's like you're not going to eat all your food at the dinner table. How about you get full on the Brussels sprouts, not on the dessert? So eat the dessert first on the SAT. Also, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, and I'm going to go into more depth here. You got to know how they do things, guys, how they write questions, just understanding the test better. And honestly, this isn't some super secretive hack or anything. This is hopefully common sense. But honestly, if you just go home and spend an hour reviewing in great depth all of the questions you missed from your test, it's the same damn test every time. Like it's the same questions recycled over and over again with slightly different words and numbers. So if you even just went home and self-analyzed your performance, you just get better from that. You would notice that the SAT does certain kinds of things and doesn't do certain other kinds of things. One thing that people sometimes overlook, and I'll give you an example of this, is people think that like you're not supposed to pick the right answer, you're picking the most right answer. Like they're all right, but one of them's more right. No, three of them are wrong. They can't have this one's right, but this one's more right. Like how subjective is that? You know how many annoying parents would call and yell at the television, I have a physics professor at USC and my son has to go to Yale. Here's why your question's flawed. They're like, no, sir, shut up. Here's why they're all wrong, except for this one. B is the right answer, and here's why. So when we get to things like, and here's an example. Let's just look at this reading passage question, for example. These answer choices all seem sort of tempting in some way or another, but make no mistake, three of them are wrong. Absolutely categorically wrong, and one of them is not wrong. Now, the one that is not wrong, and this is the thing the SAT loves doing, it might be like a little tricky, might sound not like fun words, but there's one that's not wrong and the other three are. So here, let's just summarize this real quickly. Most of our mental actions with the world around us are completely mundane. A pencil on a desk is dull and needs sharpening. A friend's face shines like a beacon out of a crowd. A friend's face brings back warming and childhood memories. A hallway smells of cleaning detergent as we walk through it. Thoughts and perceptions flow by us with incredible ease. I'm not going to do that because I forgot my tablet. But if I was writing a note in the margin, I might say something like perception equals easy. It's not that big a deal for me to look around a room and I'm like, look, a poster, look, a door, look, a person. My brain just does that. It's pretty easy. Or so it seems. Transition clue. Given what doctors and psychologists know about the brain and its workings, even the ability to perceive a dull pencil on a desk is a mysterious and profound achievement. My note-taking, if this was an ACT passage and I was writing in the margins, I would say something like, perception seems easy, but wow. If it was an SAT, they let you actually notate like you're doing a PDF markup and you can actually notate your notes on the thing. If that helps you, that can be a way to increase understanding. Either way, though, we do need the main idea of the passage. And then we need to think about what it is they're actually asking. Here, they're focusing on the first paragraph. Now, what relevance does that have? Well, let me show you guys. If you see anything from the second paragraph, it is off limits. For this question anyway, because they are only talking about the first paragraph. So I'm just going to ignore this part. We're looking at the first paragraph, and here's where it gets a little tricky. Never be afraid to summarize or reread something, especially on the SAT where the writing can be quite dense sometimes. Implicitly compares our experience of sensory impression. Barf, what are you saying? You mean compares like the pencil and the face and the hallway? Weren't they just saying it's not a big deal? Kind of like easy? So maybe my prediction would be something like easy, not that hard to figure out, easy for my brain to do. I'm not worried about the part where it's actually mysterious. That's off limits. That's what we call a wrong scope, wrong answer choice. They're pulling in something from the wrong part of the passage. So 3 of these are wrong and 1 of them is right. Are they comparing these pencil face hallway things to a repeated image? What word there kind of bothers us? I do not like the word repeated. They didn't say anything was repeated. Some smarty is always like, oh, look, they repeated pencil in the second paragraph, off limits. Second paragraph's off limits. So you're absolutely right. That word eliminates A. All you're looking for is the one word that kills the wrong answer choice. Every word in it needs to be perfect. I'll even argue that image is wrong. Because of pencil, sure, that's an image. Face of a friend, sure. Third one's a smell, though. Hallway smells of cleaning detergent. Well, it was 2/3 right. Well, then it's all thirds wrong. Unless it's always 100% accurate, it is the wrong answer, and you should not pick it. So, I mean, even image is wrong here. A is eliminated. A longing reminiscence. Now, sometimes people like this one. I will not make any further judgment on it. It's okay to be like, yeah, sure, maybe. I'm not sure about that one yet. I'll come back and look at it more later. Better to take the quick gut feeling pass, come back later. How about an unobstructed stream? A lot of people's reaction when they see that answer is like, huh? I don't even know what that means. You know what you should do? Call it maybe. Don't really know. Don't even understand what it's asking. Gonna leave it alone. How about a mysterious achievement? Wrong paragraph. So that is off limits because that is from not the first paragraph, from the second. Okay, so B or C, one of them is right, one of them is wrong. I would recommend for any of you who like are pretty good at this section, but sometimes get tricked on the harder ones. Here's what I want you to train yourself to do when you get to that position. Stop worrying about the one you like better. They both are like maybe okay. One of them though is wrong. And so if you find the thing that's wrong with one of them, you're done, even if you don't really understand the other one. And if we look at longing reminiscence and we analyze it a little more carefully, what's a reminiscence, guys? Is that a memory? Wait, a pencil on a desk is dull, present tense? It's not a memory. Face of a friend, okay, I'll give you that. That one could be a memory. Hallway smells of cleaning, that's present tense. Only one of these three things was happening in the past tense. Didn't we say 2/3 was wrong? 1/3 is even less right. So I don't like reminiscence. Also, a longing reminiscence. Longing is what we call a too extreme word. When they use words like all, never, very, always, mostly, then it's probably wrong. Those words are too extreme because they're taking it and saying like, oh, anytime you think about anything, it's always like, I remember that pencil. We had such good times sharpening one another. Shut up. Like, no, that's not what they're doing at all here. I will give you that a face of a friend could be a longing reminiscence. Longing still feels a little extreme to me. They're not saying you're longing for your friend. This is the wrong answer, guys. There's a lot of problematic things with it. And that's going to leave us with C. But I didn't like C. I don't care. It's not wrong. And if you look carefully, stream, something that flows through us. So yeah, that is supported. And unobstructed, what does that mean? Not obstructed? Well, where were the obstructions? No blockages. Well, I guess there weren't any blockages. Oh, so unobstructed. Oh, but I just don't like C. You can like it or not, but it's right. Or better yet, sometimes it's easier to say it's not wrong. And on the SAT, sometimes you have no choices that you like, so you pick the one that's not wrong because doesn't that right? Right. Anyway, know how the test works. Like when you learn, oh, that's how they're going to play. Oh, that's how they're going to play. And if you learn those rules, by the way, there's only 3 wrong answer choices. Every single question on every SAT or ACT ever is either never said that, meaning sounds reasonable, but I guess they didn't technically say it, too extreme, like longing, or wrong scope from the wrong part, like A and D were. And A was also a never said that. So every single answer here is a never said that, a too extreme, or a wrong scope, except for C, which is the correct. So stop worrying about the one you like the best and kill the 3 that are wrong, and you'll make good headway on this. They also have introduced onto the SAT this new vocab section. I include this one here, not because number 2 is like the hardest question ever, it's a little challenging, but it's a great example of something that the SAT does a ton of these days, which is giving you clues and forcing you to focus on what you're actually supposed to be reading. There's a big push in the academic world these days of knowing a random fact isn't something that like humans need to be able to do anymore. Like you don't need to know what the capital of Poland is off the top of your head. You have a device in your phone that has more computing power than the moon computer did when we went on Apollo. What is tricky is, are you focusing on the thing you're actually supposed to focus on? Yeah, I know you can give me 1,000 words on Romeo and Juliet, but can you actually answer the question that I asked you about it? And so a lot of questions focus on giving you a bunch of stuff you don't need, but then asking you a question that you got to focus on. That takes different forms on the SAT, but in these vocab ones, they want you to use the clues to get the answer. So I'm going to show you how we like highlight clues on these types of questions. And again, you can mark this up like it's a PDF on the SAT, even though it's digital, or you can use scratch paper and do it that way if you prefer. And on the ACT, you would do that. So Ridley Wong, the protagonist of this novel, is a poet, an occupation which, in Delaney's work, is not blank. Colon. Colon means here comes the definition of the word. Colons are the biggest, most obvious clue giveaway they give you on this section, so always highlight those. Well, what's the deal with being a poet? Nearly a dozen of the characters are poets or writers. If you went down to the DMV and you asked, 20 people what their job is, do you think 6 of them or 12 of them would be like, I'm a poet? Probably not. We're not living in like Elizabethan England here and like London by the Globe Theater. This is not a job that a lot of people have. But in this person's works, apparently this is here's where my clue would come in. It's a common job, so it's not uncommon, would be a good prediction. Not uncommon would be a word I would like to see. Now, I don't see uncommon, unfortunately. Instead, I see a lot of really fancy vocab words here. But I might be able to eliminate some of them. Or if you have a good vocab, you might see it already. But we can also eliminate things that are just not in line with the clues. For instance, lucrative. You guys know what lucrative means? Lucrative means good for making money. Oh yeah, poets, they don't make very much money. That's a poor person's job. Well, Amanda Gorman would like to have a word with you. But that's not the clue. We're not talking about whether or not poets make money. We're not here to argue with your parent who says you shouldn't get a creative writing major. This is just not supported, so it can't be the answer. Tedious. There's another word here that you're like, oh yeah, poems are so tedious to read. Oh, even worse to write them. They're so annoying and drudging. That's what tedious means. That's not the clues they're talking about here. They're just talking about this job not being uncommon. Maybe you don't know infallible, but you've probably seen the word typical before. Do you guys know that adding an A to the beginning of any word, like amoral, asexual, atypical, means not that thing? Atypical literally means not common, which is what we're looking for here and is the answer. You might have found this question easy if you knew that. And I will say, the vocab section is very easy if you know all the vocab words. But if you don't, you got to break them down into their roots and sometimes knowing those help. Infallible, maybe that means not able to fall. It's exactly what it means. Poets can't ever make mistakes. So I'm sure Amanda Gorman even, once in a while breaks a dish or something. So that is not our word either, but you have to focus on the clues that they're giving you and you have to answer the questions that they're asking you. Don't just read it and be like, oh, the summary is this. Start there, but focus on what they actually. All right, let's talk about math. Shift gears. We'll do 2 of these because this is a very important part of the SAT, especially, but it's also a big part of the ACT. There's a lot of fun tricks that you guys can learn for the math section. I'm not going to say, again, being good at math never hurts. It's never bad to be good at math. It'll just give you more options to get questions right. But a lot of times there's actually a better way than doing the actual math. And one of the first things I love to teach people when we're doing a prep class or like tutoring is, listen, open up your mind a little bit. Like the way that your math teacher said to do it, that's fine, but that's just one way. There's usually 2 or 3 different ways to do a problem. Sometimes the other methods are much faster. Especially now that the SAT gives you a big fat Desmos graphing calculator to use on every single question. I could do a whole hour-long presentation just on Desmos calculator tricks, some of the things you can do to hack these questions to bits. It's almost unfair. It's like cheating. But they're going to give it to you. It's not cheating. You're allowed to do it. So on a question like this one, where it says, f of x equals 4x squared minus 50x plus 26, the given equation gives the value of x. For what value of x does f of x reach its minimum? Where does y reach its minimum? To do this problem mathematically, you would need to complete the square and put this into vertex form. Vertex form of a parabola is a probably one of the more advanced concepts on the SAT, something hopefully you're learning in Algebra 2. You could do it that way. Or you could just graph it in their Desmos calculator and look at the bottom. Just literally type this in and hit enter and look at it. The answer here, the X value is 6.25. That's what you would bubble in. That's the correct answer. You don't have to do any math on this. I'll give you a calculator to do it for you. You could do the same thing on the ACT. You have to bring your own calculator to that test, but why would you want to do algebra when you can just hit enter? Let the calculator help you. The Desmos thing has stuff like mean functions. You can say mean of a bunch of numbers like it's an Excel cell, and it'll just tell you what the mean is. You don't have to add them all up and divide by how many there are. It just does that. There are even ways that you can take 2 points that they have given you, assign a line to it, say, tell me the slope, and it'll tell you the slope. There's stuff like that you can do. Take advantage of learning, whether you do a class or not. Like, please teach yourself all the fun tricks that the Desmos can do. It is magical, and it makes even the hardest SAT problem sometimes way, way, way easier. Now, not every trick is a calculator trick. There are some other good old-fashioned ones, like this one here. This question, to do this mathematically, you would need to do either division of polynomials or synthetic division. Those swear words. Oh my God. No, I forgot about those the second after they taught us. Okay, cool. You don't need to do it that way. I guess you could do a calculator on this. You could set this equal to y, graph the initial version, and then graph all of these and see which one looked like it. That's a little time consuming. But my favorite way to do this problem is with a strategy called make up numbers. We're just going to pretend that x is 1. Wait, hold on. How do you know that x is 1? I don't, but how do you know it isn't? Couldn't it be 1? Well, yeah, but couldn't it be 2 or 10? Sure. But those are harder. I like using 1. If you ever see algebra on the SAT or ACT and you're like not really sure what to do, or it feels like it's going to be really time consuming, just make up a number. They didn't say x couldn't be 1, so therefore it can. Step 1 of make up numbers is, surprise, surprise, make up numbers. Make up the easiest things they'll let you get away with. I could make x 19, but I don't want to. I'd rather make it 1. All right, well, what do we do with that then? You plug it in. Step 2 of make up numbers is you take x as 1 or whatever you picked, plug it in here. And you say, if x was 1, what the heck would this thing be? Well, 5 times 1 is 5, minus 2, it's going to be 3. On the bottom, we're going to have 1 plus 3 is 4. Okay, 3/4, I guess. Now let me pause here. That's step 2 of make up numbers. Let me make sure I'm clear here. Did we have to say that x was 1? Yeah, we could have picked anything we wanted, but I did it because it was easy. And even if we picked x was 20 and this answer came out to be something different, I don't really care. Does everyone agree that if x was 1, the answer would have to be 3/4? Okay, all you have to do then is take x as 1, plug it into your answer choices, and whichever of them comes out to be 3/4 is your answer. Now, a couple of these don't even have x's in them. So this one, I mean, there's no x to plug in. You just solve this. It's what, 3/3? Well, that's not 3/4. So goodbye. That answer is eliminated. This one also is not 3/4. This is 5 minus barely anything. 5 minus 2/3 was at like 4 1/3. It's not anywhere close to 3/4. So that's not going to be my answer. That also is not equal to 3/4. Therefore, gone. This one is going to be 5 minus, and here we have to plug in our x's. 1, you've got to plug the same x in, of course. We'll plug it in down here too in a minute. We got x minus, or 5 minus 2, what, 2/4? 2/4 is like a half. 5 minus 2/4 is, well, that's not 3/4, that's 4.5, right? Oh, I guess it's D then. Wait, hold on. You better prove that. I don't believe in this strategy yet. All right, fine, we'll prove it. 5 minus 17/4, which I'll write this here. And 17/4 is a fraction, but I'm going to convert this 5 into something with a 4 on the bottom. 5 is how many fourths, guys? Is that 20/4? What's 20 minus 17? What the hell? Wait, hold on. Hold on. What if I said x was 2? Well, D would work. What if I said X was 197? I don't know why you would do that, but yeah, it would work. Because guess what? D is the right answer. One of these has to be the right answer. They can't have an answer with no right answers. D is equivalent to the original version. If something is equivalent in algebra, you plug in the same thing, you should get the same thing out. That's fundamental rules of algebra. You don't have to do that algebra, though, if you can just make up a number and chunk it in there and let the math do the work for you. Lots of fun strategies like this. Learning them makes you have more power. You don't just have the sword anymore when you're in that dumb role-playing video game. Now you have a boomerang and a bow and arrow and a bomb and all these other weapons. Math is great. Math works well. Math is always an option for SAT problems, but it's not always the best one. You can kill a metal robot with a sword, but it takes a really long time. Probably better to use the flamethrower on that guy. Use the make up numbers flamethrower and torch sticks. That was sort of violent, but not as bad as punching. They're video game characters. They don't feel anything. Never actually punched my top. They had a time. No. That, guys, is some strategies to help you do better. Let me close this up by relating this last part here, and then I'll tie this all together and answer some questions for you guys. Basically, improvement's got 3 parts. And you guys should be commended because you did a huge thing this morning in doing the first part. Do practice questions. Practice always helps, but don't let that be the only thing you do because it's about quality of work, not just quantity. You can throw a million balls incorrectly against the, catcher's mitt, or you can do 100 with proper mechanics and focus and actually get the better practicing. So don't just have taken this practice test, guys. Go home and review your mistakes. Learn from these mistakes. Whether it's a math concept you didn't know, a grammar rule you didn't spot, a wrong answer type, or a trick that you didn't know about, you're going to see the same questions again. That is what standardized means. They can't give you a totally different bank of questions and expect a test in March and a test in May to be comparable. It has to be the same things. They even reuse the same vocab words. They use the same math concepts. They use the same grammar rules over and over again. There's exactly the same percentage of the different types of grammar rules that they test. And it takes a little while to get used to that because it's weird stuff, but that's what I'm here for. We'll tell you exactly what you need to know and what you don't need to know, and that can be helpful. It's also something that you can do on your own. You don't necessarily need me to push in the right direction. Okay, so where do we go from here, guys? Go home, analyze the hell out of these tests. If you need more help, we have, of course, prep classes that I mostly teach myself. In fact, our SAT summer class is starting tomorrow. We had our first test this morning, but if you took one here, that's kind of the same thing. But we have later tests as well. The rest of our schedule is up here through the end of the year. We also do college application essays and college just app general workshops. Some of that stuff's here, but I'm not going to turn this into some big sales pitchy thing. Suffice to say that if you need some help, we're here. I've had great success over 20 years of running this company and cranking people's scores way up, getting people into colleges that they really have no business getting into, but that's the whole point of this. No, they do have business getting into if they're putting in the work and learning the tricks and doing it, then yeah, you earned that 1500 SAT score. You still did it. I didn't take the test for you, but I can help push you guys in the right direction if you need. Anyway, lots of information about us in this packet if you want to read any of that. Can I answer any questions for you guys? Is there anything that I didn't?
Okay, sure. So one of the main reasons I'm taking the SAT was that throughout high school, I got all A's except for 3 B's, all of which were in math. So I definitely want to focus on the math section because, I don't know. I'm not applying to any, the only, more selective schools that I want to apply to are NYU and UMich. So I'm not applying to any Ivy Leagues. But I am going to be a senior in August, and I am taking the August SAT because I finally got a spot, thank God. But
great, good job. It's hard to get test spots. You got to sign up way in advance. Yes. So, can I ask you a question? Have you considered the ACT if your weakness is math?
I don't know. I looked into it, and I wasn't sure with the timing because I haven't registered for an ACT.
Okay. If you're going to be a senior, you still have time to do, you might be able to get a spot for the September test. And certainly October, depending on when your deadlines are. Even if you're doing early decision or whatever, sometimes you can send in your scores after you've sent in the rest of your application, and they'll consider them along with it if they haven't made a decision yet. So something to think about if you are considering it. Just get your hands on a practice ACT and see if you do better. But that would be a way to go too. If you did want to focus on preparing for the test, whether it's SAT or ACT, but you're like, oh, I don't need to do a full course, I just need to do part of it. That's where like private one-on-one tutoring would come in. And I have a band of tutors who does that as well.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, focus
There's-
on the math, but yeah, pick your test first.
Okay, yeah, because okay, I kind of forgot what I was gonna. Oh yeah, but I was also wondering for GPA, do you know how many colleges recalculate the GPA? Because I also take a lot of dual enrollment classes at my local community college, but my school is weird in that even though it's like a college law class, like it counts for regular credit, so it brings down my weighted GPA.
That's a school by school basis question, but taking colleges, law classes in high school is going to help you one way or another. Either it
Okay.
will factor into your GPA in a positive way, and or the college will just be impressed that you even did that. So even if they're like, well, we're not going to affect your GPA, but that still looks really good. So it's good that you did that. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just make sure you're putting that stuff on your application.
Okay. Okay.
Cool.
And
Great
then
questions. Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think I enrolled to take the full August SAT prep course,
Okay.
which is coming up soon, but I
Yeah.
took the practice test 1 today. Should
Not
I
a big deal. Yeah, the
Okay.
practice test 2 will just be an extra one you could do as practice later, but we're not going to be reviewing in tomorrow's class too heavily the practice test.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions in the room here? Yeah. No, colleges don't care. They know that they both have their challenges. Like, oh, the SAT's questions are harder. Yeah, but there's 215 of them on the ACT. You got to go really damn fast. Well, what's better, being fast or being good? Both. Oh, well, they don't care. No schools have a preference. Just take whichever one you think you'll do better on, or take them both and send your higher score in. Yes, generally, that's going to be a question for the college. The idea is that, the whole point is I go to a school where all the classes are really easy and I have a 4.2 GPA. Well, fine. I take harder classes and I have a lower GPA because I got an A- once in a while, which is better. It's good to challenge yourself. They like to see hard, challenging classes like the ones you're going to see in college. Most colleges do look at your weighted GPA. But some schools, weighted GPAs mean more than others. There's schools where they give weighted GPAs out even for freshman level, like honors classes. Like if you go to Peninsula, there's kids there with like 4.8s. Whereas you can't possibly get that high GPA at a different school. And so you're like, well, that's not fair. They know they weight it all according to like your school. I don't want to say it's about class rank, but in a way it kind of is. How are you doing relative to the other kids at your high school? Are you one of the top scoring, top GPA students? Then colleges are going to love that. Do you have a 4.2, but you're the 300th ranked kids because some kids have 6.0s? Well, then that's not so good. So it's really just a matter of what's available. Yeah. Where do you go to school? Okay, so El Segundo is, certainly well above average. It's not, and I listen, my kids are in El Segundo district, so I love El Segundo High. Our college is going to be like, oh, Harvard, it's Harvard Westlake, and so therefore, if you even go there, we should consider you. No, but it's going to be in the top quartile of schools in the country in terms of like impressiveness and stuff. They also know what's available. If your school doesn't offer any APs, well, that's not fair for you because you don't have a chance to take them. So they know what you've got. They're going to look well upon El Segundo High, but it depends. Are there 200 kids there with higher GPAs than you? Then you're not going to get into UCLA. It just kind of depends on that. Other questions, guys? I feel like I undersold that too. El Segundo is one of the best high schools in Los Angeles. So okay, okay, good. I'm not trying to be like, but like, is there somewhere a more exclusive, fancy private school where it's like harder? Yeah, sure, I'm sure there is, but there's many schools where it's much easier to get a high GPA than it does again. So, all right, guys, thank you. I hope I pushed everyone in the right direction at least a little bit here today. You can always email and call me if you have questions. My contact is here. And if you need any help down the line, guys, I'm here for you. Thank you guys all very much. See you around. Thanks on Zoomers. We'll see you guys soon. Bye, everybody.